like to welcome everybody to our presentation tonight. This is a parenting workshop put on by Life Launch Centers. And, really our goal, our why, what we do is all about trying to help create stronger families and stronger futures. Let's jump into it. Tonight, we're talking about connected parenting and just maybe a little bit of background about us. So my name is Joe Newman, and I am the Business Development Director at Life Launch Centers. I have a background in human development and family studies. And I also have been working with Life Launch Centers for a couple of years now. And I mostly do the technology stuff, the radio shows, TV shows, appearances, and kind of public education. But tonight we also have with us Kimball DeLeMare, who is our Chief Clinical Director. He's a licensed clinical social worker. And I want to give Kimball just a minute to introduce himself and let everybody know kind of where you're coming from, what your background is.
I've been at this for over 40 years. Was a kid that would have really benefited from Life Launch Centers as a teenager, making some really poor choices a long time ago, over 40 years ago, but loved what happens in this field and the changes that are made and the heroic efforts of families. I've been mainly working in mental health in a variety of settings: psychiatric hospitals, group homes, outpatient practice, residential treatment practices. I've consulted with wilderness programs. I've usually had a small private practice. But most importantly, I'm a dad, 2 adopted kids, and a stepdaughter. So I get to be taught all of the time by the kids in my own family as I'm working through things. So a
lot of personal experience as well as clinical experience. It's good to know we've got a lot of that coming from a very well-seasoned guy in this field.
I was attracted to come to Life Launch Centers just a while back. I ended up on lots of planes doing some consulting with several programs nationally and was just missing working more personally with families and actually seeing my own family. So it's been a joy to be able to be with Life Launch, and I love our resilience model. So this workshop, some of you out of St. George heard some of these principles, which then got me thinking a little bit more about what might be a presentation that could be of help to yourselves as well as to me for some good reminders. So how do you love your kids when they're driving nuts? This just happens to hit with a lot of us as kids start to go through some developmental changing. They end up lots of times disconnected in terms of how they understand long-term planning, reasoning, empathy. At the same time, they want to separate from their families and become more independent. They become more and more unlovable. If you look at my granddaughter here.
Let me pull that up nice and big here. Go ahead.
So there's a kid that is pretty lovable. She is now hitting 13, and we will see how the next few years go.
Oh boy, 13. That's a tough age. 13 to 15. That's been hard for us.
Then look at me, back in 71 as a sophomore. So that tells you that I'm an old guy. Am I even smiling? And I did have hair at the time.
Yeah, I was going to say you got some hair, but no smile.
Yeah.
That's kind of the opposite.
And some of you will have looked at your kids in the photos in their teenage years, and they won't even smile. So as this starts to devolve in our relationships with our kids from that fun granddaughter that I was just showing it to other things, we start to look at what the relationship becomes. So they want rides places. So let's talk about what happens to the relationships lots of times. We start to become what we call resource managers. Are you a big time resource manager? When you're talking with your kids, is it more about I need a ride here, or can I have the car tonight, or I need to be picked off here? Or you're asking them, did you remember to do your homework? The basement doesn't look so good. You were supposed to do these things before you left. Can you come with me to run these errands? You didn't get the stuff done in the backyard. Who are these guys that you're going with tonight? I've never even heard of them before. And if you think about it, how many of your conversations are about resources versus relationships? If you were going to think of a percentage right now, would it be 80% is about resources? And when it comes to your spouse, if you're married, I mean, there are times with my wife where it's like, yeah, I'll be able to get home at such and such a time. I'll get over to see your mom at such and such a time. Can you pick up the stuff from so-and-so? Are you going to deliver that over to them? What are we doing on Friday? And so a lot of our conversation, I find, ends up being a whole bunch about resources. So I just want you to think a little bit about how that time fits. Were you doing a lot of resource discussions with your 4-year-old or even with your 6-year-old? But as they got older, they had games, they had activities, they had classes. And as that happened, you became more and more of a resource manager rather than somebody that they were going to be connecting to. The next thing that happens with us is that often we overstructure. This is a competitive world. And in some ways, if I'm busy monitoring their schedule and monitoring our family schedule, I can kind of feel like I'm being a parent, but I'm not really being a parent that has any depth and connection in the relationship. Let's get into this activity. Let's get into that. And some of you right now, it's like, wait a minute, I've got to get my kid into Life Launch 3 nights a week or 3 afternoons a week, and I got to get them back. Oh, and they've got an outpatient session that's on the off day, and I need to get to these things. So even Life Launches itself can end up getting to a place where it can feel overstructured. If you add that into some part-time work, there's some single moms that are pretty heroic that are on this call that I can't imagine in some ways how they're managing all of the resources, and they're not necessarily having kids that are overstructured, but they may be overstructured with a night job, with household duties, and another part-time job on the side. And perhaps they have an ailing parent, and you throw COVID into that. So there are a whole bunch of reasons why we can end up more and more distant from our kids as we go along. So I want you to think about the structure. Are there some things that you could unstructure? With my granddaughter, they decided recently to not have her go to this additional practice for the dance company, which may put her in jeopardy when she tries out for the high school dance team in a couple of years. On the other side of it, she actually can put her feet up and giggle a little bit. And that's been crucial for her. So the structure ends up being something that we have to look at in terms of a balance. So I want you to think about how much resource managing you're doing and how much of that resource management could start to be done by older teenagers to where they're managing it and you're not, and how much of that structure could start to become theirs. The older a kid is, the less we should be scheduling their dental appointment, the less we should be scheduling when they should be doing their homework or making appointments for Lifeline centers and things like that. If they're going to be late, maybe they should be making the call. So as you offload some of those things that empower kids, it can start to simplify your life as a parent.
I got to say, that's kind of scary sometimes, Kimball, as a parent. Like, you start to realize, so I have 2 teenagers, one 17, one 16, a son and a daughter. And it's kind of crazy to all of a sudden realize they have a life outside of what I do for them. You know, like in fact, it can create conflict because you're like, well, hey, wait a second, there's this other resource, like I need a babysitter, or I'm managing some resources and you have your own life outside of what I'm saying. Like, that makes it even more difficult. So I really appreciate what you're saying there, is that the more that ultimately we do want to move them towards completely managing their own resources.
as you think through these things, there are more and more things that we can offload. How many of you end up with your kids saying, can you go to the clerk to ask them a question about that pair of pants? Or to buy something there where they're wondering about the cost of it. The more of those things that we do for them, the more we end up being overstructured.
Yeah, absolutely.
So overstructuring is a two-way street. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, just in terms of some parenting tip, is what I call the moral of the story. There are several of us that want to relate to our kids, and so they're going through a difficult time, and we went through a difficult time. And as the kids saying, you know what, nobody laughed at stuff, and when I went over to sit at their table, they moved. And a parent that wants to relate lots of times will say, you know, that happened to me in 7th grade. And let me tell you what I did after that. You know, I found some other friends. There were some other people that weren't having anybody at their table, and I went over to their table and we made friends. And that's what you should do. With our kids, we want to teach them as much as we can, but there are times when you're trying to connect with your kid. Well, all you need to say is, I went through some really rough stuff like that when I was in 7th grade, and I just wish that year would have ended. And don't even say anything about how you solved it. If you're not able to do that once in a while, to leave the moral of the story out, your kid's going to start to tune you out. We so badly want to say, and therefore, and the moral of the story is.
I am terrible at that. I gotta admit, like, that is really hard. You feel like it's your job as a parent to teach, but what you're saying is you got to balance that along with building a relationship. And I mean, you don't act that way towards friends or, you know, colleagues or whatever. You kind of just tell the story, but not necessarily feel like you have to emphasize the moral. Is that an all the time thing? How do you balance that?
Well, if you're relating to that kid in that story, and it's like, my 7th grade year really was rough. You know, it was miserable. You know, I somehow got through it, but it sure sounds like it's rough on you. If I leave it there, I've now created a safe place for the kid to then say, well, what did you do? Instead of me saying, and the moral of the story is, and if you just persevere, and if you do this or that, you know,
right,
you're going to be fine. Me being vulnerable allows them to start to be vulnerable and to be able to be curious.
I love that.
So in terms of the balance, I recommend that you stay away from giving the moral of the story. Let it be an appetizer. Also, it's careful, you know, you don't want to be to where you end up over competing. Well, you think you had it rough. I was the only kid in the whole school that did such and such.
Yeah.
And my pain's even greater than your pain. So you see
that.
this girl just tuning it out. It's like, so I don't want my pain. When I'm relating to a kid, I want to be more general about mine to where they understand I'm empathizing. But I don't want my story to be able to overwhelm their story or compete with it to where theirs is now minimized.
Gotcha. Well, I think that's a great balance. I love your examples, Kimball, what you're talking about with the moral of the story. And I think that relates right into the next key point here that you wanted to bring up, that sometimes our kids don't really perceive that we were ever really born young or like they were, or tell us more about that principle.
Our kids do think that we were somehow born fully grown. It's hard for them to even think about us as a sophomore in school. There's a group of private boarding schools that do individual one-on-one teaching of kids. They're pretty expensive, called Fusion Academies. In the front of every Fusion Academy, they have pictures from junior high of all of their faculty, warts and all, braces and all, bad hairdos and all, awkwardness and all, skinniness or big, huge feet, just all of the awkwardness of kids that are in junior high. And when you come into their center, that's what is led with. Right off the bat, it creates a way for a kid to relate. So it really does tie into the moral of the story that, I had my awkward time. They don't have to say a ton about it. And it's so hard, if I pulled out my junior high stuff, I'm probably going to get some giggles from my kids.
Well, I sure like that one of you as a sophomore with all that hair and no smile.
Yeah, I was 5'7" and 120 pounds. By the time I was a senior, I was 6'2", 185. But that was a rough year.
Yeah.
And if I just say it to that point, perhaps the kids are going to be able to get some things that are going to be going their way. But just know that they're already feeling intimidated and overwhelmed by our life experience. They're going to want to, in some ways, bring us down to their size and minimize our influence. There was a wise man who once said that the only substitute for experience is being 16. There's other guys that say, when my kid hit about 22, my IQ jumped by about 20 points. Suddenly I was a pretty brilliant man.
Yeah.
But they already have to acknowledge that we're responsible people. We're managing bills. We're renting homes or buying homes and renting apartments and running businesses or overseeing important positions with our jobs and negotiating with adults in the world. And so there are times where they already are not feeling, they don't see us as being vulnerable. It's kind of an automatic thing. And so keep that in mind, that the lectures and then just their assumptions about us, they will look eagerly lots of times at our faults. I had a friend that on a long driving trips, he kind of picked his nose. And that became a big joke with his kids. And it was one of the ways that they could kind of say that their dad wasn't all that. There are times when they're looking at times to be really critical of you. And it's not necessarily always because they're wanting to be mean to you. It's because because they already feel overloaded or overwhelmed by you and possibly intimidated, and they want to look at some equalizers. So the more vulnerable and approachable we are, the less that can happen for them.
I love that. I've definitely seen that with my kids. I've got a bunch of younger kids particularly. And when I show them pictures of myself as a little kid with glasses and big crazy hair, they definitely, it adds to that element of being able to connect with your kids. Like they love seeing that you were a kid. And so I love that principle.
They love to amplify your mistakes too. And it's like they'll celebrate when you blow it on something. And I have kind of a thin skin with that. And I immediately want to be defensive.
Yeah.
And because I'm a therapist, I can use all sorts of clever, mean ways to say things back to them, Well, you weren't
sarcastic or manipulative.
I could be sarcastic. So there are times where you need to have a little bit of a thick skin and say, this kid needs to kind of hammer on me. Now, some of you have some kids where you just know they're being abusive and they're just teeing off on you to purposely hurt you. That's different than what I'm talking about. We can talk the next time we do a parenting workshop. We're going to be talking about discipline, and we can talk a little bit about how to sort through that balance of a kid that's purposely hurtful and those that aren't.
So I love that. It kind of goes into our next discussion about, they want to amplify our problems or things that we do wrong. A lot of parents feel like maybe apologizing can be a difficult thing for them because it almost feels like that maybe you're losing a position of power with your kid or whatever, if you feel like you need to apologize. And so oftentimes the apologies are not very sincere. What do you mean by true apologies?
Dad, you were late. You were going to pick us up, and Mom had to take us. Well, I was busy with so much at work. I texted your mom and let her know. That's not even close to a true apology. Not even close, but it's something that I've done as a busy executive in the mental health field. I can always come up with noble things that I was doing with troubled clients and even people that are suicidal and things like that. But there have been some times where I've neglected things with my kids. I was working in a psychiatric hospital where a kid had been really aggressive towards other people. And over a course of about 4 weeks, he decreased his levels of verbal and physical aggression from about 3 times a day to 1 time a week over a month's time. And wow. Then his 5th week, he escalated one day. And I came in to lecture him in his bedroom, and he said, "You've shined me on for 3 weeks in a row. You were late for sessions, and then your sessions were shorter than they should have been. And that's not the only reason that I acted out. But I feel like you're the wrong guy to come in here and be calling me on my stuff." And my bare face was just hanging out for everyone to see. It was like, and I could have said, I'm the clinical director of a psychiatric hospital. There's 80 other clients here, and there's lots of emergent stuff that's happening. But I had given him my word about things. And so, on the spot, I said, I am so sorry. You're exactly right about this. So my first part of it was that I said you were right about it, and I acknowledged it. The second part of my apology was that I said that I understood what he was going through, and that I neglected and I set him up, and that I was hurtful to him. And that was not, in my role as a counselor, it's ironic that here I am shining on somebody that's important. And I've told you were important, and my actions don't fit. And then I went to, and here's how I'm going to make it up. I'm going to set aside some extra time here and do 2 sessions in these next couple of days rather than the one that's scheduled with you. And I'm going to do 3 this next week so I can get back with you. And if I've got a glitch with that, I want you to go down to Sally, who's my administrative assistant, and tell her that Kimball's screwing up. And so I gave him a pass that he could go to talk to Sally at any time.
So you can empower him a little bit. That's great.
So I empowered him, but I acknowledged him, and I took it. And it would have been so easy with me, with all that I was doing at the time and the stressors that I was feeling, to be able to just not truly apologize. It's so tempting when let's say that they took the car, they didn't put gas in it, they didn't tell you where they were, they didn't, the phone's missing and they want you to buy a new one. You had to drive over to so-and-so's house to get their phone when it was finally found. And then they were yelling it in the way back because you embarrassed them by talking to the dad of the girl that they went to see the phone, and they're doing all of that. And then the next day you screw up and burn the pancakes.
Yeah.
It's like, I've got a whole load of material that I can rip on them and not give my apology. And I know that she loves my pancakes when they're really soft. She does not like them burnt. Can I separate all of that other stuff that would allow me to have to play a one-up position on my apology and just say, I know you love your pancakes this way. Let me make another batch. What happens if I do a true apology on a little thing like that? Then I start to have a connection with this kid. And that kid starts to reciprocate as they go along. So that's what I'm talking about with true apologies. They're hard to do, particularly if you have an ego like I do.
I think like most all of us do. That's probably the hardest thing for me to get past in a true apology. But you're right. When I get real vulnerable with them and I give that true apology where they can feel it's from, the deep depth part of my heart, their compassion center of their brain kicks in, and they're quick to forgive. They realize, when I'm really being sincere. So I love that. So I think that also kind of ties into this next discussion here, where we're talking about self-care or their care. What do we mean by the difference here?
Yeah, if you notice, I put creative self-care.
Yeah, I was curious to what that meant.
So there are times when I'm busy with where my self-care is, I'm going to binge something that I heard about. I heard that the Queen's Gambit thing was a pretty cool thing on Netflix. So my self-care is putting my feet up and watching 3 or 4 of those series late, not getting my sleep, and just tuning out the world. Now, that's not bad self-care, but is it all that creative? It's like I've got a TV and I have my own screen, just like the kids have their screens, and I can get myself lost in those pretty easily. Or I can drive to one place to get the one thing with those 2 friends. And am I ever being creative? Am I ever challenging myself? Do I go back to, what? There's a cool new little miniature golf course down there in St. George that my niece just sent a picture of her and family. It looked pretty cool to me. Well, I haven't miniature golfed in years, so I don't know that I'm always being creative about things that I could do. There's a go-to thing in our family where we do some jigsaw puzzles, and I just don't like jigsaw puzzles. If it's a 100-piece puzzle, yeah. But creative self-care means that I sometimes get out of my own comfort zone. And as I start to be creative, it shows kids that adulthood isn't all that boring. Some kids look at us, it's like, I want you to grow up and be more adult. And they look at us suffering through our days and sitting blindlessly watching the TV at night. It's like, that's adult-like.
That doesn't look very fun.
Are they actually having fun? So if you can switch out some moments, I'm going to go get some of that really spicy stuff over this place. I had one dad where I asked him to do creative self-care, and unfortunately he decided he wanted to brew homemade beer.
That's pretty creative.
His daughter had drug and alcohol programs. It's like problems. And so let's find out another creative source. But my wife has moved into quilting, and it's like, all right, well, do I actually try and run a pattern on the sewing machine and be vulnerable? Are there other things that I could be doing? So as I start to do some things like that, it opens up the world for the kids to consider doing some things. And it gets me out of this rut of the predictable self-care. There are some mindfulness exercises that we introduce to your kids every single week. And there's a whole toolbox of them that they'll have through the course of the programming. And we need to do a better job of giving all of those to you. But switching those up can be creative self-care. As we do that, then we're more energized to do something for them. Some of you are busier than a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest. and when you're that busy, how do I do creative self-care? It may be that I drive a different route home and that I put on some other kind of radio music than my regular. It might be that I put on some outfit that's in my closet I haven't worn for a while. It might be that I just switch up what I'm eating for breakfast. It might be that's like, you know what, I'm having cold cereal for lunch. There need to be some other ways when you're just so busy to be creative in some ways to switch it up. The fact that we have gotten to the place we are in life, that you guys can log onto a Zoom call, drive a car over to Life Launch Center or do those things, get yourself through high school and through other education and learn skills, means that you have a brain that can work really well. And this is an area where it's important for us to switch up our routines. It's refreshing, it can be powerful, and they can be tiny little things that just allow us to model for our kids. That gives you just that much more energy to give them some care.
You know, I got to say, self-care is probably for me one of the hardest things because, like you said, we're so busy. I've had to kind of talk to my wife about that and realize, you know, that it's important for both of us. So we have like a date night together, but then I also just have like guys' night. And I have 7 kids. And so I feel like almost every minute is either wrapped up in work or being a dad. And so I have designated Thursday night. Thursday night is guys' night. And I may not be with any other guy. Like I may just go, like you said, on a hike. Last week, I went rock climbing at the indoor rock climbing gym here. And it was awesome. It was like, this is me. Like I have almost forgotten what it felt like to just be me. And I think we feel really guilty sometimes about taking that time for self-care because we're always so worried about their care, right? We're always feel like we're invested in helping our kids so much that I see myself not being the best dad because I'm not considering my own needs sometimes. It almost seems like a irony.
Yeah, and it goes all the way back to all the parents do is serve kids. This doesn't sound like, I don't think I want to be a parent.
That doesn't look like a lot of fun, right? So
yeah.
The question is do they both work? Do both work? Can you achieve that?
And you know, it's kind of a tricky question. So if you're creative with your own self-care, it allows you to be more powerful in your care of them.
I love that. And I definitely have been feeling that, which, you know, I think kind of also then leads into this next discussion about platitudes versus gratitude. And we'd all love to have a little more gratitude, you know, in our lives, both personally and maybe expressed to us. What is this? Explain your concept here with platitudes versus gratitude.
This is another thing that works really well. Our kids are pretty insecure. They're not sure how it's going to be in this life. And you throw COVID into it and this evolving economy and the conflicts politically, all of this stuff that's happening. They're insecure as it is. And they need to have real-time acknowledgement of true accomplishments as opposed to, you're so great, or that was great how you did that the other day. Appreciated how you took care of your little sister. That's more of a platitude. The thing is that you gave up time with your 2 best friends to stay home with Miley. And to see you on the ground giving that time to Miley when she can be so buggy, kind of light like that, was so impressive to me. That's a whole different thing than you really saved my butt tonight by watching Miley. That's a pretty good one. But if I'm able to be specific and I talk about that time and some actual actions that happened as she was doing what she was doing, that gives that kid some information about their value and their capacity. You know, so we have to think about how to be able to do that. Do we avoid linking the compliment to a future expectation? So I say that stuff about Miley and I say, and Thursday night, I'm sure you know, and I'm expecting the same thing out of you Thursday. And now that I know that, you know, it's like great compliment.
Or it almost feels like strings attached. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are times when I'll say, hey, that was great how you did that with your little brother. I wish you could do that more with him because he really liked it. Now I kind of going, if I stay just with, it was so great how you did that with your little brother. Or, you know, you put that whole meal on, that was awesome. Does your compliment reflect your true feelings? You know, when I saw you in there with your grandma and you were so gentle with her, I can't tell you how much that meant to me. I know we have our problems, but to see how gentle you were with her and how just carefully you were with her and stayed with her, even though she was kind of rambling, that was so tender for me. And I went to bed last night just smiling about that. When a kid hears it that way, other than you're so cool with grandma, I mean, that's a compliment. But if I can be more specific and talk about my own feelings to that, it brings the heart and soul into it. And it automatically connects me in some ways to where the kid wants to be connected to me. One of my favorite ones is despite all of that. So if I was going to compliment you guys on the phone tonight, so despite all that you guys have had on your plates today, you were able to get on this call tonight with us and give some time like this, and carve out some time like this. Despite all of those things, you were able to focus like this to help out your kids. If I was sitting with you, it'd be like, it's so cool to see you in here and how you were looking over and connecting with so-and-so over on the side. That just, it was neat to see you two connect that way. It means a lot to me. It gives me more hope, and it's making my job easier. So despite ends up being a great one for a lot of these kids. Despite how angry you were with me, you still went out and took care of the stuff in the backyard. That was impressive.
I love that. That's a great kickoff word. You can I can use that in a lot of applications. I can tell I'm doing more platitudes than I am real deep gratitude. And I think it's because in order to show real gratitude, like you're talking about, by getting specific and that kind of thing, it's a lot of work. You're going to have to, again, get vulnerable with them. You're going to have to kind of let some of your true feelings out. And it's going to take some time. And so I can see what you're talking about. And I mean, relationships are work, right? It requires work in order to form a good relationship. But I love what you put on this next slide.
There's a husband and wife team, the Gottmans, who have studied couples over many years, and they ended up having a few hundred couples, where they observed them for 15 minutes dealing with a conflict, and they came up with about a 90% accuracy rating as to who was going to end up divorced versus who wouldn't end up divorced out of the families that were having conflicts. Those were people that didn't have what are called love maps. They didn't share fondness and admiration. They noticed that when these people were having conflicts with each other, the couples that could joke a little bit with each other and acknowledge the other person's point and weren't just hell-bent on winning the whole thing themselves and dominating it, were the ones that had a better shot at things. That a positive perspective. They could see that they could get through that argument, that it wasn't going to be life or death with it. So from that, they came up with basically a sound relationship house. Now, this same house is transferable when it comes to us working with our kids. Other than sexual intimacy, pretty much everything else that goes into a relationship between two life partners or husbands and wives are transferable to these kids. So there's just a little bit of information there about some love map questions. Could you describe in detail what your kid did today or yesterday? Now, if it's some of our kids, it's he got up at 11:30, asked me how come I didn't have any better food in the house, played his video games, and then kind of yelled at us and kind of stalled on his chores. Now, could you also do that when it comes to school day? You know the names of each of his teachers. Could you give some detail about what they were studying in history? Even if your kid doesn't want to tell you, how much could you know about what their day really looked like? Is there a favorite teacher they have? What do they really like at lunch? Where do they sit? Or do they always sit outside?
So,
where do they sit on the bus?
I want to mention here, it almost sounds like, I mean, there are a lot of parents that we often talk about, like helicopter parenting or something that they're like overly involved in their kid's life, right? Who may know those things, but
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is like you're looking not to know those things from you taking care of all their problems, but by simply asking them questions and building a relationship with them, like, hey, tell me about who's your favorite teacher right now, and what are you learning about in your math class? And is that what you're kind of like, how do you get all that information you're talking about in the love map?
Well, if I'm doing some of those earlier steps I talked about, that's going to open some dialogue. A lot of them is like, I don't know, why do you even care about that stuff? I want to go with these guys. I want to have this stupid conversation with you right now. They need to know that I'm truly interested in some of these things and I'm fascinated by it. It's like, I was wondering about what history is like for you guys now that this COVID stuff is hitting. How do you manage to stay on that Zoom call the whole time? I mean, is there stuff that they're doing with that kind of pulls you in? I mean, is it better if they're showing some cartoons? I mean, how do you get through that? Instead of, so tell me, what are the subjects in history? Oh, you guys are now in Utah history. So where are you now? Are you still with the Brigham Young stuff or to the Golden Spike? That's different than how are you managing listening to Mrs. Nielsen talk about the Golden Spike? What's it like? So despite that, you still are in that Zoom class and you're still pulling it off, So it's more that I'm fascinated like it would be if I'm talking with other people. So there's just a list of a few questions that you could be asking. A real quick way to get to some of these things is to ask what are called most questions. If I asked all of you, if we were in a room right now, if I said, what was the most cold situation you were ever in? You could probably pull up one of those and it would be a pretty interesting story. What was the most embarrassed you were in junior high? What was the coolest teacher you ever had? So those are most questions. And flip-flopping back those of them asking a most question, you asking a most question can be great. You have to be careful about boundaries. What was the most abusive thing you ever went through is not a question I may want to be asking. These are more questions that you would be asking a friend as you were, in a mixer, getting to know people at a new job or a new neighborhood gathering or things. So just think about that. Relationships take us really thinking through things. Somebody, if you go online, you can look at Gottman. There's some great articles that just talk about how to work on your own relationships. And then you can play off of that and considering what you could adapt in working with your kid.
I love it. And honestly, it feels like a lot of the kind of questions that you'd ask, on a first date or someone that you're trying to get to know, that you're honestly interested in, getting to know their thoughts and feelings and experiences. And for whatever reason, it is difficult to like apply this towards your kids. My kids that I think that I know so well, there's a whole bunch in their life that I don't know regularly that changes. And I think that's what we're talking about here is updating that love map, finding out more about what their current situation's like.
And it's more that we know about this and are interested in it as opposed to us controlling it.
I love that.
I love that.
Well, I was curious about what this slide meant is you're talking about earned fun versus fun. This is the way that we're building relationships with our kids. Help us understand what you're meaning here.
So first, let's say that a kid blew out of school with some stuff. They were violating their curfew and they were on social media till all hours of the night. And they've now lost privilege of the car. They've lost privilege of the phone. And they've been restricted to just a couple of friends with a shorter amount of time, or their friends need to come over to the house. Can I still have some fun with that kid? Because they're going to make it seem like I've banished them to a Soviet Union gulag. And they're suffering up in outer Siberia, These are natural consequences for them. Can I still have fun with a kid like that and not give up where I am with the consequences, which will be in our next call. There are times where we think until the kid's doing these things, only then can we have fun with them. That's wrong. We can still have some fun. There can still be some joking, just like the couples that the Gottmans observed. They can still tease each other, even though they're in the midst of a serious conflict. They could joke a little bit about how they're navigating it. It takes some real skill to be able to still have a little bit of fun and not be too sarcastic about it. Maybe it's like, I know this isn't much, but you leave a Reese's. If that's their favorite candy, you leave a Reese's bar on the pillow and say, I know this isn't a phone. I know this ain't a car, but at least there's something here for you. So there's times where they can still have a little tiny bit of some pleasure, or they get to start the ping pong game, or they get to be the one that chooses. It's going to be a lousy night, but I'm giving you control on the TV within reason.
Gotcha.
There can be some stuff that way. Some of us try and repair a relationship when they're acting like we've just banished them to Siberia, that we have to turn around and give them a big Disney trip. And there's this thing about Disneyland dads, and divorces, to where I need to buy my kid big stuff.
Right.
I'm not against big stuff. We just went with the grandkids and our kids to Orlando because it was really cheap right now. And the parks were pretty low, and I cashed in a bunch of miles, frequent flyer miles. But I better have been doing some stuff at the house where we're playing some Yahtzee and some things like that with them, doing some puzzles. So it shouldn't be Disney. If you're over relying on the big stuff to buy them, you're going to lose them. So just keep that in mind in terms of things, and still give them some fun when they are really being jerky.
I got you. So it's more of a constant. It's more of the constant fun than the big Disneyland trips like you're talking about. All right.
Tina put on the chat thing, quality versus quantity.
Absolutely.
And Tina, that thing about the quality takes some creativity. What can be quality? And am I willing to do something that I think is really boring because they like doing it? My kid kicks my butt at ping pong, but I need to go down and get beat at ping pong by him because there's other stuff I want him to do of mine that's not very fun for him either. So if I can reciprocate, that can be great. But I love that quality over quantity. But it does take some thinking through that.
Again, that sounds like a dating relationship. When you're trying to build a relationship, you go do some stuff that maybe is out of your comfort zone that they like. And as you learn to share those common experiences, then you grow in your appreciation for each other.
Yeah. Be careful on it. I had a dad who wanted to connect with his two teenage sons and decided he was going to inline skate with them. Put on the skates next to his stairs and broke both elbows.
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, that's great. Now, this last slide, you were talking about, being hijacked. Does any of this work if we're hijacked? Help us understand what you're talking about here.
Yeah. So you guys are pretty familiar with the resilience model. We get triggered. As we get triggered, we get hijacked to where more the kind of the reptilian, the limbic part of our brain takes over, and our reasoning, long-term planning, and empathy part takes a vacation. Maybe it's off to Orlando for a while. And now I'm not functioning very well. I'm either want to fight, take off, or freeze. I either want to go to the bathroom, get in the car, go somewhere, and just get out of it, have them see that kid for a while, or I want to rip on him a little bit or something of that sort. So, here I am talking about all these wonderful things for us to do, and our kids will sabotage lots of these things. And sometimes it's developmental to where they actually don't have the kind of insight to respond in ways that are adult-like. They're not learning to do those things yet. So there are times where, as we're getting hijacked, is there some other way I cannot get this to tie in? With the parent group down in St. George a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about how these kids can trigger us. And I talked about getting up and just walking over away from them without eye contact and taking some deep breaths and just, oh, I got to get through this for a little bit. Maybe I could slow down. Maybe I'm not going to have this battle be, maybe I'm not going to turn this battle into the war. Maybe I am going to let this room for right now and figure out another way to confront him about the room to where he doesn't get triggered because of me being triggered about all the crap on the floor. Maybe it's like, I can lead this. It doesn't look great. Right now with COVID, with so few visitors, I guess our houses could look in a little more different. There's times where the kid just wanted to provoke you and to get you off your game. And that's one time where they feel some power, is when they can get you emotionally triggered and off your game. To where if you can just stay quiet, can I get through the next couple of minutes of this? If I can anticipate and slow down my triggers, it's like, this usually happens right when I start to ask about the chore stuff. I just know this is going to happen. And he's going to be pushing me on Thursday night about the car on Friday. And this is probably going to be our classic Thursday night. If I know that's going to be there, I can sometimes predict we're going to end up having this car thing. And that's one of those things that triggers. Can we figure out another way for us to talk about this? Sometimes if I'm anticipating when I get triggered, and there's classic times that we all know, you can be preemptive with it. You can actually have some dialogue and be vulnerable and say, this is the time that triggers me. So I want to have this conversation earlier in the week. There may be something else I could. There are other ways to communicate. With the St. George group, I talked about some letters that my mom had written to me. I've got one that's right here. This is from 1970. Kimball, you carry your grandfather's name. I know how much you respect him. How are you doing on carrying your grandfather's name now? It hurts me to see you lose out on things that you were enjoying just a little while ago. I was so mad when I got this letter, but there were several times when I was less and less triggered where I let this thing impact on me. It wouldn't let go of me. If she'd come into my room and started to talk about that, I would have found ways to try and see if I couldn't provoke her into getting mad at me so I could justify me being mad at her. So there's power in how we do cards or notes. Sometimes you send the dog in, or send, instead of sending in the clowns like that old song is, you send in the dogs or the guinea pig or something else, and just give some time that way. I have a family where this girl just loved to just tie her mom into knots, but she loved her grandma. And they just couldn't figure out what to do. And so I said to the mom, the next time she's really going on you, well, you just call grandma, first give grandma heads up on this. And just say to your daughter, I'm pretty overwhelmed. Your grandma seems to have a better relationship with me. I'm just can you talk to grandma? And handed the phone to her. And she was so freaking embarrassed by the whole thing and just got in these tears and stuff. But, it took a while for that mom to think about who has a relationship other than me that might be of some help to us. We don't have to do this all by ourselves. Are there set times for us to have our negotiations rather than right in the moment when the car's honking and them in front is not the time to be talking about how late they are going to be and how much money they want from us. That's not the time to be doing that. There needs to be another time. That's not usually how it would work with your boss at a place, at your job. Hey, Tom, I'm a little short and I need this. And my wife's right out in front. Can you give me an advance on my check? We're going to get into a world like that. And so we need to train and also be learning how to do that. So there's just a few more things that tie into this model. There's a lot of tools that your kids are developing that you can develop as well. I hope these things have been of some benefit to you. It was a little bit scattered, but these are some of the ones that are the most important for me. The next time we do a workshop, it's going to be about discipline. if we're unable, myself included as a dad, to start to connect to our kids, if we're not able to do those things, our discipline just isn't going to work. It's either going to have to turn into being a cop and a criminal, or a best friend that gives in, and maybe some variation in between. But the deeper we're connected, and the resilience model, it shows it kind of as like the eighth step in it, but all of these steps need to be happening simultaneously. When we present this over an 8-week period, it's kind of in a linear fashion to where kids can come in at any time and learn the skills. But all of the skills are talked about literally each week. Connection to me, I think, ends up being the most important of all. The more safe a kid feels, the better connected, the less triggered they are, the more hopeful they are, the less stories they have in their heads, the more they can go with the flow. So we hope this is of some help to you tonight. For those groups that are still together, I'm looking forward to having your own discussion about this.
Well, it's been awesome. I love the insights that you've shared with us tonight. There is so much power in building connections, and really what we're all trying to do, like we started with, is to just help us have stronger families and stronger futures. I think that's what most parents and families are trying to accomplish. And it can be tough. It can be really tough. And I love the real practical application you bring these principles. I mean, they're familiar, I think, from other relationships, and we just maybe sometimes forget to apply them towards some of the most important relationships in our lives, those with our loved ones, our kids, our close family members. And so really appreciate your insights tonight, Kimball. And yeah, I hope that the discussion continues, especially for those that are together in the group in the centers.
Thanks, you guys, so much.
But anyway, I appreciate everybody's participation tonight and being in this call. If you have any other additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. Our lifelaunchcenters.com is how you can get in touch with us. Mostly there's plenty of other resources on there about parenting, about the resilience model, some radio shows, some other workshops that you'd be welcome to tune into. But please, if you do have any questions, would like some specific information or insights to your family situation, we're always here and would love to talk to you. So thanks again, Kimball, and thank you everybody for jumping on this call tonight, and I hope to see you again next month.
Take care, you guys. See ya.